We're going to do a discussion about 3D printing. We've been hearing some really great stories over the last couple hours, and wanted to open up a bigger discussion with some of the presenters about 3D printing, but also continue to let you guys have a chance to ask some questions and participate in the discussion as well. So one of the things that I wanted to lead off with, I think this is really interesting, but all of you guys are from Northern Europe. And one of the things that I've identified, Dale Doherty has talked about this a bit as well, is how Northern Europe really is leading so much of the charge in the 3D printing, especially the consumer 3D printing world. Why? Anyone? Any reasons why you guys think that might be the case? How have things developed to help make it be such a, I don't know, attractive and so much momentum in this region for pushing some of the innovation forward?
I get this question quite a lot, but it's very hard to put a finger on it because you also have a bias. If you live in the Netherlands, you hear about everybody saying, okay, in the Netherlands, that's where everything is happening. But of course, it's not true because people say that more often if you're from the Netherlands and you remember that more clearly. But I think there is a concentration, and some of it is actually, I think, related to very early media exposure. So there were some cases where nobody actually knew about 3D printing, and then some people got on TV. We also got on TV in a very big talk show. And so for the Netherlands, there was a certain awareness level that was very, very much close to zero. And then at some point, everybody knew about 3D printing. And they didn't remember us by name or anything, but still this awareness is the first step, I think, in this idea of accepting, okay, 3D printing could be something useful. So there, yeah, it's some gate that needs to be passed. First, people have to know about it a little bit.
Right.
I mean, I think the other thing as well is just demographic. You have a highly tech-conscious crowd, and I think the interesting, because like Makercon leapt ahead of the curve in New York. They were one of the first out as well. But Ultimaker really killed it in Europe, and I think there's, apart from having a good machine, you guys also did kits very early on. And not everyone did that, and I think those kits really helped propel that momentum as well. I remember on our end, we've only shipped fully assembled machines because we wanted to focus on the quality part, but the cost of that was losing some of that momentum in terms early adopters getting into it as well. And I think what was really interesting, because I've been watching the industry, is you guys at Ultimaker got such a really good foothold in Europe because really you were the only people that were a viable alternative to Makerbot there. And then when Makerbot, turned to the dark side, I understand that they did that for some good reasons. I hope we'll get into some of the patent stuff as well because I have opinions. But I think that really just helped propel Ultimaker even further, and I have to say that I applaud that. I think that was really, really cool. And then we're seeing other companies here like Polarworks come online now as well with new and beautiful and really simple designs. And Scandinavia has always been good at design. That's what a lot of Scandinavia is known for. And so it doesn't surprise me to see a beautiful, smart and simple and elegant 3D printer come out here in Norway or Denmark and Sweden as well. I think that's part of the culture.
So I don't want to step on the toes too much of the ensuing discussion that'll happen after this one, which we'll talk about. It'll talk about open hardware patents and so forth. But I do think it is an interesting point you're making. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about the importance of the open source background and what the open source future is in the 3D printing space.
Well, I could say something about that. For example, for Imagine, we're really trying to support that culture of sharing. But there is some, that's what they call it in legal terms, terra incognita, of this legal field. It's not clear whether a license that is really founded in for example, copyright law will also apply to physical objects made out of that description. And so there's a lot of things that are unclear in that area. And so instead of just sitting back and waiting for it, we're also interested in seeing if we can create an actual license that will deal with these issues differently from GPL. There's something about patents in GPL, but very little. And it's mostly geared towards software, and this is really a different beast. And so it needs something different as well. So that's why at least we've tried to create a start and make it an open discussion, so more RFC style than the fact that, well, we want to create a license, let's just throw something out there. So we're throwing some ideas out there, but really waiting and interested in feedback from you makers, for example, whether that license is suitable for you. So yeah, that's something we're trying to do.
So Can I just add a quick story I heard last week from a guy who was working with jewelry and 3D printing. And someone asked him, like, aren't there lots of problems with patent, like people copying your work? And he said, well, sure, but it's always been a problem because you can simply just take this small jewelry and just put it in some silicone and reproduce it. So that's, for people, it's kind of easy to link it with how it's been done. But as you said, there's this totally new idea of how to do patent copyrights. It's difficult for people to relate to.
So this year, in the last few months, there's been some new printers that have been coming out from some big name companies. You know, Dremel has got mentioned a couple times already today. I think there's the Hewlett-Packard's rumored to have something that might be coming out in the next couple weeks, possibly. Even Autodesk getting involved in doing it. You know, it's a major company. So this is something. It's a big departure from the early hacker roots of 3D printing. But I'm curious about. I know that you guys have some serious involvement in the history of the development of 3D printing. What are your feelings about the significance, the advantages and disadvantages of having some of these major companies now getting involved? How does it affect things?
I guess I can speak to that. I think that Dremel coming out and Hewlett-Packard circling and like the big companies are understanding that there's a market. I think that's really exciting because it kind of indicates that it is a big market. There is a need. I think it's premature to go into the mass consumer market. I really do. I think it's contingent on two things. If it's going to work in the mass consumer market right now, like imagine, your mom using a 3D printer right now. For that to work, she's going to need to know CAD modeling and be able to operate all the different types of software and like the user interface and stuff. And I think the big companies coming in, they're going to try to make it easier and raise the bar in terms of that usability. So I see that as a good thing. But I'm also a little bit worried about them coming in prematurely because I think they're going to get burnt and then they'll pull back and then it'll be hard to get the investment into space to really grow as quickly as potentially. And this is such a valuable tool. I want everyone to have this tool, or if not own it, have access to it. So I think that's kind of like the two elements there. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We have a piece that we just published by Professor Glenn Bull, who started off talking with us about how difficult it is to integrate 3D printers into the classroom because of that exact same thing, where if you bring something in too early with too little guidance, you set a bad precedent for the students, and they, instead of becoming empowered by the technology, become scared of it or disillusioned with what it can or can't do. So that's an interesting point from the mass market side. I appreciate that.
Talking about education, I'm at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, and we have a bunch of Ultimakers, and we have some really high-tech like SLS machines. And in my experience, just the fact that you can have a 3D printer close to you and actually like do some direct learning is just totally different. You can't compare like advanced materials with the fact that you can actually work on it. So it's just it's really interesting to see how advanced technology doesn't always help. It's how accessible it is.
Right. So along those lines, Maker Faire Rome, there was an Italian 3D printer company, WASP, that was showing off its gargantuan Delta 3D printer machine that has a mud and fiber extruder head. And they're talking about printing huts in impoverished regions. We wrote a piece about it on Make's website, and immediately got a note from the Washington Post asking if they could write a piece about it and use our video, which led to local radio station KCBS asking if they could do an interview with us. So it's interesting how much attention that one piece can drive, even though people have been talking about 3D printing structures for a long time. One of the things that I've found really interesting about the whole writing this and seeing this and asking some of the questions is, how is this something that's easier or better? People have been using simple rural materials and processes for generations and generations, for centuries. So what does 3D printing bring to the table that allows it to be better or different?
I think the real thing for me, which is just amazing, is not having physical skills, craftsman skills, that sort of thing, and yet being able to go, take 15 pictures of my dad from different directions, send it through 123D Catch, get a 3D model back, cut and paste his face onto a garden gnome and print that garden gnome in the course of one afternoon. There's no way I could do that if I was whittling it out of a bone or stick or something, or clay. I just don't have those skills. And it takes thousands and thousands of hours to develop those skills. And so I think that the big breakthrough, at least for me with 3D printing, is it lowers the barriers for participation. And you're talking about education earlier as well. We see it, we work a lot with kids. And we see it the moment they get the idea that actually they can just hit print and then they get it and they can test that object. Their whole attitude changes towards failure, because suddenly it's a lot cheaper to fail. And so, because that price has gone down in terms of the time you're spending physically doing something before you do the test, you test more often, you become more bold in your hypothesis, and you become more of a prototyper. And for me, it's the fundamental change that needs to happen in education as well, which is moving from educating employees to educating entrepreneurs. That's the shift.
There are two words one which you're touching upon, which is iteration, rapid iteration. That is one really fundamental thing, which is true for also artisan work, but even more so with a 3D printer, and scalability, which is the fact that you can have, like you said, like a farm of mud hut printers. You can't just make one at a time. You can make 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20.
That touches on a key point that I find valuable about 3D printers, which is the fact that you can do something else while the machine creates whatever it is for you.
And that's a good point as well. Yeah, that's yeah. I think that one of the things that Caleb, one of our other editors at Make, and I talked about, he had a really good response to that question, because I knew that that'd be something that might come up in the KCBS interview, which he did because I was on a plane flying to here. But he said, no, it's an easy answer. We don't know. At this point, we're building the technology so we can start doing new things, and we'll figure it out once we get there. But with a lot of this stuff,
I think there's a real interesting parallel to be drawn there. So, I remember sitting on the bus as a kid going to school, and I had a question, and I didn't know where to get that answer. I didn't have smartphones. I didn't have Google. Now I'm sitting on a bus or a train or whatever. I can pull up my smartphone. I can Google the question. I get my answer. In a similar way, if I'm sitting on a bus or a train or whatever now, and I have an idea and I want a physical object, where do I go? It doesn't exist yet. But the technology is there. I can pull up my phone now. It's going to be freaking painful. but I can go in and I can model something, and I can hit print, and it'll print on my printer at home. And then hopefully by the time I get there, it isn't just a big plastic mess, but it's actually an object, right? But that's the future we're heading towards.
Yeah. And I don't know if people talk about this enough, but we've given ourselves superhuman cyborg, all-knowing powers with our smartphones, and it's an incredible time. But translating that into or transferring it to the physical world, that's another interesting way to look at this. Manipulating matter, we're superheroes. Use our powers for good.
I think a very interesting area there is that it's all transitioning more into skills of software instead of hardware. So even generating your hardware can be done through software. And so the skill set is shifting, but also, machines are able to produce based on that. And so there's an interesting thing happening where we don't know exactly where it's heading, but it's more heading towards knowledge about how to make, and that knowledge becomes interchangeable. So whether you're printing something or using a system to generate a hand with parametric tool, or whether you're designing a house which will be printed on a larger scale printer, the same set of knowledge is applicable there. So this infrastructure can be used either to generate houses or to generate prosthetic devices. But this knowledge is really still being developed, and all of these tools are still being developed. And so it's in such an early stage that very interesting things will come out of this. And you're right, it's not clear what it's going to be, but it's going to be very similar to what the internet allowed for in terms of a platform where everybody could access a lot of that knowledge that is put out there, and everybody could contribute to it. And I think that's where, if you talk about sharing, that's where the real power lies in this new revolution.
And sorry, I have to say I just love your ambitious goal of, was it 2028 for the Star Trek replicator? It's 14 years. I think we have some catching up to do. So that's,
interestingly, I had the opportunity to speak with Erik, who is one of the pioneers in nanotechnology.
Okay.
And he said that basically with 3D printing, you're using exactly the same tool set, but at a different scale. And so nanotechnology would be the requirement for this replicator kind of new generation of printers. And you'd more have something like a growing structure than an actual top-down process. But that technology to design is actually the same. So I thought that was fascinating. It's really, if we educate people with 3D printers right now, and those printers become malleable in the sense that it's not just a tool that you use, but also something you can redefine and make a different printer out of, then I think we're actually really laying that foundation for also the nanotechnology revolution.
So maybe it'll be tea Earl Grey hot, but it'll be like this tiny little cup. It'll take 6 hours to make.
But imagine if you could compare the learning curve of 3D printing and actually designing, which many people think like, well, normal people can't be designers and stuff. Look at young kids who spend hundreds of hours learning, I don't know, like Minecraft or gaming, and they get so good. Like they acquire the skill set, which they're just doing it on themselves. I mean, if you were to sort of swap out gaming with learning how to to fix your toaster or whatever, right. That's incredible. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't game or anything, but I mean, you got to think in those terms. Like, it's not something they need to go to school to learn or anything.
I've got 2 nephews, 5 and 7 years old, and the Minecraft addicts, as I think most kids are. But it's been interesting because if approached the right way, it's a really great gateway. And one of the things that I've done with that is I've looked at a little bit of some of the stuff they've done in Minecraft, and I've said, you think this is pretty cool? Check this out. And I open up Tinkercad, and they, in their eyes, bug out, and then especially when they realize you can press the export to Minecraft button and bring your Tinkercad creations into that world. But it's also, we started a project where we've taken physical items, and I've started showing them some of the design skills where with a Lego motorcycle and a set of digital calipers, we can rebuild in Tinkercad, these pieces. And then we can export those to a 3D printer so we can actually see how close we're getting with our design modeling skills. And it's a really, I mean, it's such a lightweight platform. It's such an easy one to get started with. But then, again, as a gateway, that's, that starts teaching them to think a certain way. Which I think there's that education of the next generation will be what really makes this whole thing blossom. So Hilda said something, and I wish that she were able to join us for this panel, but I feel bad talking about her without her here. She said that the promise of desktop 3D printing is overblown, something more or less to that effect, which I thought was an interesting statement. And I would like to press her for a little bit more on that, but since she's not here, I can't. But I would like to ask you guys your thoughts. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? If you do agree, why?
I would say yes and no, because it's very time dependent. I think if you look at these capabilities and they're increasing exponentially, then on the short run, exponential curves tend to be pretty flat, and so it is actually overblown in the short run. And then in the long run, I think if you really if you have confidence that this will really stay an exponential curve, and it will really, in terms of capabilities, will achieve this nano production where it's really something else. You can create parts that are lighter than air, that are really strong, that are actually that do not wear down, and so it becomes fundamentally different in terms of capabilities. And it's very hard to imagine what a world like that would look like, but we're actually getting there. So. Interestingly, then you cannot be ambitious enough, I think, in terms of what you think or your estimates, but it's so time dependent.
Isn't this quite a good example? I think at least. I mean, this is a $50 prosthetic, and the equivalent prosthetic, which is made by a person who does it professionally, is thousands of dollars. And okay, it might last longer, but does it need to last longer? Isn't it better that they can use it and break it, yep, and remake it?
And size it to their growing body, especially if you're talking about quickly growing youth, which they grow up fast.
It depends on who you ask as well, though, because like if you're expecting a magic box, if you're expecting the Star Trek replicator, right? Essentially a magic box that gives you whatever you want, right? You're gonna have a bad time, because it's just not yet, at least. But if you follow the Gartner hype cycle, I think we're kind of over the biggest bulk of the hype, and moving more into that trough of disillusionment where people start waking up and going, oh, okay, well, hang on, maybe it's not useful for absolutely everything, but it's useful for these and these and these and these things. And I think that I kind of see three waves with the technology as well. There's the current wave we're in, where it's really the early adopter crowd, the makers, and the people who've already been using 3D printing for 30 years, architects, engineers, designers. They're starting to use desktop 3D printing. But then I see the second wave is really, it's not the home market, it's going to be the back-end retail. You have a 3D scanner in Tiffany's or Gullsmeden or wherever you go, and you stick your hand in there and you get the custom-made ring or whatever sent to you, or custom prosthetic soles or whatever it is that you need. But it's back end. The 3D printing isn't necessarily happening right in front of you. It's the 3D printing shop in the corner doing that stuff. And then finally, once the software is there and the usability is there, and very importantly, the object libraries are there as well, and the connection is there, then you can start going in and doing, the Dremel 3D printer that has 1 million replacement parts right there at home on your desktop. But I think that's not quite there yet, because those 1 million parts don't exist just yet.
Right.
So
I think that the company that figures out how to create a iTunes model for 3D printing, and if you think of everything how iTunes helped disrupt the music industry by unifying major players with a set price and a single one-button click
I
access
actually
location.
disagree, because if you think about it, like Amazon kind of does this in that it's a one-stop shop for everything, right, and it's the same with iTunes. But 3D printing is a tool that is part of a lot of different manufacturing chains, or could be part of a lot of different manufacturing chains. And 3D printing is also a very broad term for quite a few different technologies as well. So, imagine you go into a clothing store and you get a 3D scan of yourself. Now, that scan is data that can be used for a whole bunch of different things. So really, when I go online and I order clothes, I should be able to just pay with my credit card, and then my biometrics are stored on my credit card, and they send, that only the biometrics that you need, of course, because you care about privacy. But then, you get that sent to the clothing manufacturer, and they know exactly what sizes to send to you. Now, that's got nothing to do with 3D printing, but it's part of the same ecosystem. And in a similar way, because I've got my, biometrics there, I can get custom-made shoes or gloves or whatever. But the projection there that I see is it's much more of a question of just you click that buy button online. You don't care about what happens behind. And I think that the companies that will succeed in the space are the people that, hopefully like us, that develop that API that makes it easy for other people to connect into our back end. And then really the front end, like the iTunes, doesn't so much exist because it's going into all the existing product lines and just becoming part of the tool chain. It's not the entire tool chain, it's just part of it that fits in, particularly for parts that have high complexity, or where you're doing smaller production runs of maybe 1,000 or up to 10,000 parts. That's my. We can fight about it later.
No, and it's an interesting approach to how this could develop.
Yeah.
And that's really focusing on the personalization, the individualization abilities of 3D printing versus, say, from my approach, thinking about the long tail of product replacement for specific things.
Are we still live streaming?
I don't know if we were ever live streaming or just recording.
Recording. Okay. For the record, if I'm wrong in 10 years, I owe him a beer.
But another reason why you could disagree is that that products aren't music, and it's not. I mean, it doesn't need to be like music is basically a one-way street. The artist makes the music, and it's given. Products should be both ways. I mean, if you're talking about sort of mass customization again, that as a sort of ultimate goal, then is selling a single item, is that the way you should do it? I'm not sure.
So we've got a few minutes for some questions from you guys. And we've got a microphone running around. So.
Yeah. I actually have more than one question, sorry. One thing is that when we are talking about 3D printing, we always talk about parts. We should probably ask about assemblies, because that will probably be the next thing, because printing out parts is quite easy, but printing out assemblies that works straight off is a lot more difficult. When that's said, then we can go to the next point, and that's 4D.
Say that again?
4D.
4D, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where you print parts that actually works by itself.
Yeah.
You went into it a little bit on the micro machines and Drexler, but it's an interesting question.
If you talk about 3D printing in certain stages, I think we have more and more control over geometry. So in terms of geometry, creating higher resolution things, but also things that fit together properly, but not completely be touching, so they can move independently of each other. So you can create hinges and stuff like that. That is really the first stage, I would say. And then there's another stage after that, which is really freedom of composition. So you could create items which are, well, first you have geometries that you cannot produce with traditional means. And then you also have compositions that are impossible to produce with traditional means. So, for example, you can create composites that are, for example, for these fingers. You can create the fingertips that are very, that have a lot of friction and a lot of grip, but are flexible, a little bit cushion-like, so very biomorphic. And then the hinges themselves, they could be very low friction, so you could have Teflon filament for those things to print them. And so that's really about composition. And then you're right, after that you're going into the 4D. You can get active materials which actually have functionality regardless of their shape. And so So I'm thinking about electronics guiding electrons, but also guiding light, guiding other functional properties. So that will be really the next stage. And then embedding actual modular objects into prints, that would also increase the functionality quite a lot. And
okay,
so
time is running fast now, and we're going to have one more debate later on, so I'm sorry we have to be very short here. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Okay, there was one over here.
When you talk about mass customization and consumerism, like with the materials you use, if people are able to print things off and have like, oh, this is what I need now, I've grown out of it, throw it away, next, how sustainable is the system? Like, the material that you're throwing away, is it reusable? Like, what are the long-term ideas with that?
I want to talk to that. This is actually a super big deal. So the material that most desktop printers use right now is PLA, which is a biodegradable, non-toxic, cornstarch-based plastic. You can even get food-safe versions. It's used in medical products. We like it a lot because we work with kids. They have a tendency to chew on things. We prefer not to kill our customers. But, as Erik was just saying, this is just the beginning, and composite materials will become more and more and more important because you want to build things that actually work. Now, here's the kicker. When the IBM mainframe came out in the early 60s, 40s, it was kind of like they started talking about the dawn of the paperless office, right? And what happened with paper consumption worldwide over the next 50 years? Well, it shot through the roof, right? There's more paper still being used year by year in the world right now than ever before. And in fact, it's only back in 2003, 2004 that paper consumption in the US started to go down just on the printing side because they're becoming more electronic now, but the rest of the world is still catching up. So the point I'm making with that parable is, well, if you apply that to 3D printing, we have a massive environmental disaster on our hands if we don't take charge of the situation early on. And I think it falls on us as manufacturers and on our suppliers to ensure that the materials that we're actually using can be recycled, can ideally be upcycled and reused, but are handled in sustainable ways. And right now in the industry, I'm sad to say, very few, if any, people are doing anything about it. And I feel that very strongly that we actually have a responsibility there.
One last question.
My question might be a bit of a sidetrack here, but I'm sitting here thinking there's a development in terms of bioprinting and printing biological materials. And I was just wondering if there are any kind of, are these separate industries, or are there some kind of?
There's absolutely overlap in a lot of the way the machines, the way they work, and some of the original machines have become the key machines in the bioprinting world. But I think you guys would probably talk a little bit.
I mean, we have users that do that stuff. Heck, we have a 12-year-old kid that took our, so our printer is modular, right? So you can take the printhead off and you can put another printhead in. So they print with sugar or cells. I mean, it's basically, a 3D printer is basically a robotic arm and a glorified hot glue gun, right? Like, that's all it is. So you can switch the glue gun out and you can put something else in. So there's absolutely overlap to the point where, our users, in fact, I know that some of your users are doing this as well, where they're playing around with the machine, they put new stuff in. Like I was saying, he started as 12, he's 14 now, but he made his own chocolate extruder, he extrudes icing sugar and prints with icing sugar in Palo Alto. And it's fairly easy to do. On the bio side, you're not printing muscles or cell structures or anything, but maybe.
All right, just a very important message now. There are 2 messages I just have to say before we have a little break before the next talk. This is a message to all those who are going to run workshops tomorrow.